You know, guys, sometimes in life you hear news that just kind of stops you for a moment and you sit there thinking, man, that can't be real. That can't be true. How can that guy be gone? And that's exactly what happened when I heard about Judge Frank Caprio passing away. Frank Caprio wasn't just a judge. He wasn't just some guy sitting on a bench making decisions about traffic tickets and small offenses. He was a human being who managed to bring humanity into one of the coldest, driest, most bureaucratic environments that exists in our society, the courtroom. And I gotta be honest with you, when I first stumbled across clips of Judge Caprio online years ago, I didn't even believe what I was watching. I thought, is this real? Is this like a parody show? Is this some kind of staged performance? Because he was so different from what I had come to expect from judges. But no, it was real. That was Frank. That was who he was, day in and day out, treating people like human beings instead of numbers on a docket. And I think that's what made Frank Caprio so special and why his death hit so hard. He showed us that kindness isn't weakness, that compassion isn't some fluffy idea you leave for self-help books. He showed us that compassion could live in the hardest, most rigid structures of our society. And when he passed away, I felt this real sadness, almost like I had lost someone I knew personally, even though I never met him. That's the impact he had on so many of us. And I just want to talk about him today. I want to unpack why he mattered so much, why his approach resonates with so many people, and what we can actually learn from the way he lived and worked. When you think of a courtroom, you think of punishment, right? You think of someone standing there scared in front of a judge who doesn't have the time of day to hear their story. You think of strict rules, intimidating authority, maybe even unfairness. But Frank Caprio flipped that script. He listened, he genuinely listened. And when someone stood before him, he gave them more than just a sentence or a fine. He gave them dignity. That's rare. I've been around the block. I've talked to people from every background. I've seen the justice system chew people up. And I'm telling you, dignity is the first thing that system strips away. But Frank put it back. That's what he did every single day. Now, when you hear that he's gone, you don't just mourn the man. You mourn what he represented. Because Frank was this living example that it is possible to be fair and firm, but also kind. And I think that's why so many people around the world, millions of people who had no connection to Rhode Island, no reason to care about some municipal court judge, fell in love with him. They saw his clips on YouTube, Facebook, TikTok, wherever, and they were like, wait, justice can look like that. It was almost shocking, and it gives you hope. And man, in today's world, hope is in short supply. I remember one clip where there was this young kid, I think he was with his mom, and they were in court for some small traffic violation. And instead of just giving them a fine they couldn't afford, Frank asked questions. He dug into their life a little. And you could tell he wasn't doing it to embarrass them or to get a laugh. He was doing it because he cared. He wanted to know if the fine was going to cause them pain, if the punishment was going to make their life worse. And when he realized they were struggling, he let them off easy. And he didn't do it in a way that made them feel like charity cases. He did it in a way that gave them back their dignity. That moment stuck with me, and I think it stuck with millions of others too, because we're used to seeing power used to crush people. We're used to seeing authority used to remind people of their place. But with Frank, you saw the opposite. You saw power used to lift people up. You saw authority used to remind people that they mattered. And man, I can't tell you how rare that is. Think about it. How many people in positions of authority do you encounter in your daily life who actually make you feel seen, heard, respected? It's rare, but Frank did it on national TV, in viral videos with the whole world watching, and he never wavered. That's who he was. When I heard that he passed away, I sat with that sadness for a while. I thought about my own life, my own family, my own mortality. Because whenever someone like Frank goes, it makes you think about what kind of legacy you're going to leave behind. And here's the thing, Frank wasn't some global superstar in the traditional sense. He wasn't a rock star, an athlete, a billionaire. He was a judge in a small courtroom in Rhode Island. And yet, millions of people around the world knew his name, loved his videos, and cried when he died. How does that happen? It happens because of how he treated people. It happens because he lived his values every single day in the little interactions that add up to a life. That's the lesson here. You don't need to be the president to make an impact. You don't need to have $1 billion company. You can make an impact by being decent, by treating people well, by living your values every single day, no matter where you are. And I think about that in my own life. I've got this podcast. I talk to millions of people, and sure, I can have an impact in that space. But Frank had an impact in a courtroom with a handful of people at a time, and the ripple effects went worldwide. That tells you something about the power of authenticity. It tells you something about the power of kindness. We live in a world where everybody's performing, everybody's putting on a mask, everybody's trying to be something they're not, especially on social media. But Frank was just himself. He didn't change. He didn't play a role. He was real. And that realness connected with people on a deep level. That's why we feel his loss so strongly. And look, we all know the justice system is broken in a lot of ways. We all know it's biased, it's harsh, it's often unfair. But Frank gave us a glimpse of what it could be. He gave us this alternate vision of justice where fairness and compassion aren't mutually exclusive. And that's important because if you never see something, you don't even know it's possible. Frank made people believe a better system is possible. And when you lose someone like that, you lose a little piece of that hope. That's why it hurts so much. I think about his family too. Imagine being his kid or grandkid and knowing that the whole world saw your dad or your granddad as this beacon of kindness. That's an incredible legacy to carry. It's also heavy. But man, what a gift to grow up knowing that your last name is associated with compassion, with fairness, with dignity. That's something money can't buy. That's something fame can't buy. That's something only character can give you. So yeah, I'm sad. I'm genuinely sad, and I don't even know if I can put into words how much he mattered. But I'll say this, Frank Caprio showed us what's possible. He showed us that even in a world that feels cold and harsh and divided, one person can shine a light. And I think the best way we can honor him is not just to remember him, not just to watch his clips, but to actually live a little bit like him, to bring that compassion into our own lives, to treat people with dignity, even when we have the power not to. That's how you keep his spirit alive. You know, after I talked about the sadness of losing Judge Frank Caprio, I kept thinking about the bigger picture, because when someone like him leaves this world, it forces you to ask questions about what really matters, what kind of legacy we leave, what people will remember about us. And with Frank, the answer is so clear. People are not remembering him for how many tickets he dismissed or how many cases he closed. They're remembering him for how he made people feel. That's it. That's the whole thing. People remember kindness. People remember dignity. People remember the way you made them feel when they were vulnerable. And Frank nailed that. That's why millions of strangers, people who never even set foot in his courtroom, felt like they lost a friend when he passed. And I've been thinking about how rare that is. Think about the people we usually celebrate in society. We celebrate athletes because they break records. We celebrate business people because they make billions of dollars. We celebrate celebrities because they entertain us. But how often do we celebrate someone for simply being kind, for being compassionate, for showing love in a place where nobody expects it? That's what made Frank different. He was famous for kindness. And honestly, that's a kind of fame we don't see enough. I've watched so many of his clips over the years, and every single one of them carries the same thread. No matter who walked into that courtroom, rich or poor, young or old, guilty or just caught in a bad situation, Frank treated them the same. He listened, he laughed with them, he cried with them, and sometimes he let them off with nothing more than a smile and a piece of advice. And what blows my mind is that those moments, those small acts of compassion, ended up traveling across the world, inspiring people in countries he never visited, in cultures he didn't belong to. That's the power of authenticity. That's the power of kindness. It doesn't need translation. Now think about that. We live in this hyper-connected world, but we're also lonelier than ever. We're scrolling through feeds, comparing ourselves, arguing online, feeling disconnected from each other. And then out of nowhere, you see this old judge in Rhode Island cracking jokes with some kid who couldn't pay his ticket, or forgiving someone who was late to court because of a family tragedy. And you feel connected. You feel something real. That's why Frank's videos went viral. They weren't about drama or outrage. They were about humanity, and that's rare in this age. When I think about his death, I don't just think about the loss, I think about the responsibility it puts on the rest of us. Because when a light like Frank goes out, the world feels a little dark, but it's also a reminder that we can carry that light forward. We can pick up pieces of what he embodied and spread them in our own lives. Imagine if more teachers approached their classrooms the way Frank approached his courtroom, with patience, with humor, with empathy. Imagine if cops, politicians, CEOs, anyone in power acted with that same compassion. The world would look completely different. And here's the thing, Frank wasn't soft, he wasn't a pushover. People sometimes confuse kindness with weakness, but he proved that's not the case. He could lay down the law when he needed to. He could hold people accountable, but he did it in a way that was fair. He balanced justice with mercy, and that's a balance that's hard to strike. Most people lean too far one way or the other. They're either too harsh or they let everything slide. Frank walked that tightrope every single day, and he made it look effortless. I keep going back to his family because legacy isn't just what strangers think of you, it's what the people closest to you carry forward. His kids, his grandkids, they're inheriting not just his name but his reputation. They're inheriting a legacy of kindness. And I can't think of a greater gift to leave behind, because think about it. Wealth can disappear, fame can fade, achievements can be forgotten, but character, the way people remember you, that lasts generations, his family has that forever, and that's beautiful. You know, in a weird way, Frank's passing is also a challenge to all of us. Because it makes you ask, how do you want to be remembered? Do you want to be remembered as someone who was ruthless, who climbed the ladder by stepping on people? Or do you want to be remembered as someone who lifted others up, who left people feeling better than they did before they met you? Frank answered that question with his life, and now it's on us to answer it with ours. I think about this a lot because of the podcast. I sit across from people, I listen to their stories, I try to ask questions that matter. And sometimes, yeah, we joke around, we get silly, but at the core of it, I want people to feel heard. I want people to leave the room feeling like their story mattered. That's something I honestly learned, in part, from watching guys like Frank, because it's not about being perfect, it's about being present. And he showed us how powerful presence can be. It also hits me that Frank was 87 years old when he died. 87, that's a full life. That's decades of service, decades of impact. And I think there's something comforting in that. He didn't leave us too soon. He lived a long, meaningful life, and he left when it was his time. But man, even knowing that doesn't make it easier, because you wish people like that could live forever. You wish the world could always have that kind of light, but maybe that's the point. Maybe the point is that he lived long enough to plant seeds in millions of people, and now it's up to us to water them. Another thing I keep coming back to is how emotional he would get. You could see tears in his eyes sometimes in court, and I loved that, because here's this judge, this guy who could easily have hidden behind a mask of authority, but instead he let himself be vulnerable. He let himself feel with the people in front of him. That's not weakness, that's courage. It takes courage to cry in public, to laugh with strangers, to let the world see that you care. That's one of the things that made him so special. He wasn't afraid to be human in a place where most people try to act like robots. And that's why his death feels personal. Even if you never met him, you felt like you knew him. You felt like he could have been your grandpa, your uncle, your neighbor. That's the connection he created. That's why his courtroom became something bigger than just a courtroom. It became a stage for humanity. So yeah, I'm deeply sad, but I'm also inspired, because Frank showed us the blueprint. He showed us that one person, in one small courtroom, could change the world, not by chasing fame, not by chasing money, but by being decent, by being kind, by being human. That's the legacy of Frank Caprio. And my hope is that years from now, people won't just remember the judge who went viral on YouTube. I hope they remember the man who taught us all a lesson about humanity. I hope they remember the way he showed us that kindness is powerful, that compassion is contagious, that dignity belongs in every room, even in a courtroom. So rest in peace, Frank. Thank you for showing us the way. Thank you for reminding us of what's possible. And thank you for leaving the world a little brighter than you found it.